I had barely made it a few minutes into my 2-hour demo of Yooka-Laylee when I realized I was already chuckling to myself with a big, wide grin on my face. For all the mystery that still surrounds Yooka-Laylee's content and development beyond the first major world, one thing was made clear to me in the game's opening moments. The charm and very particular vibe that has caused Banjo-Kazooie to live on in the hearts of gamers the world over absolutely lives on in Yooka-Laylee, and that alone is cause for celebration. And that's before I've even started talking about the game itself. Let's back up for a second. Yooka-Laylee is a kickstarted 3D platformer serving as a spiritual successor to fan-favorite Rare adventure Banjo-Kazooie, and make no mistake, much of what you see in Yooka-Laylee's opening moments is designed specifically to tickle the nostalgia centers of those who look back on the Bear and Bird's adventures with fond remembrance. Even the file select screen, punctuated by cute animations of Yooka and Laylee relaxing or goofing off depending on the highlighted file, is a direct callback to Banjo-Kazooie's memorable opening moments. And that's just one of the many ways in which Yooka-Laylee demonstrates a clear love and understanding of the 3D platformer as defined by Nintendo 64-era Rare. There's a reason these familiar elements are so on point. Some of Yooka-Laylee's development team at Playtonic Games is made up of former Rare staff members who actually worked on Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie back in the day. Fortunately, the existence of Rare DNA within the development team has not prevented Playtonic from veering away from tradition when appropriate, as Yooka-Laylee takes great pains to carve out its own niche above and beyond just being a game that walks, talks, and plays like Banjo-Kazooie. Of course, most of what you'll do in Yooka-Laylee's opening hours will be familiar to Banjo-Kazooie fans. After getting used to the controls in a small, sectioned-off segment of the hub world called Shipwreck Creek, you're given your basic moves by a snake named Trouser, a shady serpentine salesman who serves as Yooka-Laylee's equivalent of Bottles the Mole, and you venture into the game's main hub world, Hivery Towers. You know, because the main villain is a bee, bees live in hives, and this hive is the headquarters of a big corporation. Yeah, this is pretty much going to be Andre's dream game. Once inside, things keep going as you'd expect. You learn another move and explore the beginning area of Hivery Towers until you find your first Pagey, thereby granting access to the game's first world, Tribal Stack Tropics. Then it's off to Tribal Stack Tropics to collect more Pageys so you can unlock more worlds in Hivery Towers, and it's at that juncture where the central points of divergence from the Banjo-Kazooie formula become readily apparent. As it turns out, Pageys are a bit more versatile than their equivalent, Jiggies, in Banjo-Kazooie. You can use them to unlock new worlds, sure, or you can use them to expand worlds you have already unlocked, paving the way to new areas in those worlds, complete with unfamiliar places to explore, new challenges to attempt, and, of course, new Pageys to collect. And here's the kicker. There's never any wrong choice. As opposed to Banjo-Kazooie's more guided structure, Playtonic wants players to chart their own course through Yooka-Laylee. There are shades of an open-world approach here, but it's not quite that. This is still very much a 3D platformer based in a hub world that branches off into several themed worlds, but the difference here is that you have far more freedom in how you approach those worlds than you ever did in the Banjo games. Do you venture forth in a linear fashion from the first world to the second and so forth? Do you fully expand and complete Tribal Stack Tropics before moving on to Icy Wonderland Glitter Glaze Glacier, the newly revealed second world? Or do you take an entirely different approach, playing the worlds out of order a little bit at a time? The way you progress through Yooka-Laylee will depend heavily upon which moves you decide to purchase from Trouser in each world, and once again, there's no wrong choice here. Moves are purchased with quills, a common collectible in each world that Banjo-Kazooie fans will recognize as being similar to notes. Except instead of notes restricting progress behind numerical gates, quills work in the opposite way. They enable progress in specific ways, and the way you progress through the game might be very different from my progression based on what moves you unlock in what order. The cleverly named Playtonics represent another unique element of Yooka-Laylee that brings player choice to the forefront. These Playtonics are given to you by Vendy, a SpongeBob SquarePants-looking NPC you'll find in each world. You can only have one Playtonic active at a time, and they affect the gameplay in various interesting ways. One lets you explore underwater areas more easily by increasing Yooka-Laylee's air supply, for example, while another gives you an extra point on your health meter, and yet others simply add different graphical effects or filters. The game clearly communicates what criteria you need to meet to unlock each Playtonic too, so in this way you can focus on unlocking the Playtonics that complement your gameplay style or appeal to you the most, which might be totally different from the Playtonics I go after first. It's a refreshingly different approach for a 3D platformer, and one that I'm looking forward to seeing play out over the course of the whole game. There are potential pitfalls, of course. For example, Yooka-Laylee consists of 5 much larger worlds to explore as opposed to the Banjo games' 10 smaller worlds each, likely as a result of the more non-linear approach to progression here. But Playtonic promised me that despite the overall world count being lower, there are so many disparate areas to explore in those worlds as you expand them that Yooka-Laylee still remains a bigger, more ambitious game than its spiritual predecessors. There isn't much to say about the nuts and bolts, pun not intended, of the gameplay itself. It's really on point. Playtonic clearly know what they're doing here. The controls are absolutely spot on. Yooka-Laylee's various moves are fun to use and have exactly the right amount of visual and tactile feedback, and the game just feels right. Within minutes of the game relinquishing control to me following the opening cutscenes, I was traipsing about the world like a pro, double jumping to and fro while deftly swinging the camera mid-jump. As a 3D platformer, Yooka-Laylee feels every bit like its forebears in all the right ways. Simply existing in this world and running around in it feels great. The camera did have a rare tendency to act up and get caught in or between certain areas in the environment, but those instances were absolutely the exception and not the rule. The one basic action returning Banjo fans might have trouble getting acclimated to is swimming. Frankly, I hated the swimming controls at first. Ascending and descending are mapped to their own buttons, while you use the analog stick to adjust the direction you're swimming in. It felt totally wrong and unintuitive until I got used to it, and even though I have a handle on the swimming controls now, I'm still not sure if I like them, but at the very least, I don't dislike them like I did initially. In my experience, it's when Yooka-Laylee deviates from its 3D platforming core and tries to shake things up that the gameplay starts to suffer. For example, some sections of Hivory Towers are gated off by mandatory quiz segments called Dr. Quack's Quiz Time, where lovable underling Dr. Quack quizzes Yooka and Laylee about the things they've done, seen, and heard so far. Naturally, the questions and their answers can vary from player to player. Now, perhaps it's just because I was constantly under the looming constraint of a 2-hour time limit, but the quiz segment I played wasn't fun and came off to me as temporarily breaking an otherwise sublime gameplay flow, and I just wanted to get it over with. Though clearly the inspiration here, Grunty's Furnace Fun this certainly is not. Whereas that felt like a true culmination of Banjo-Kazooie's adventure, Dr. Quack's Quiz Time feels like a sequence that Playtonic haphazardly included just for the sake of adding a diverse gameplay checkbox to the game's package. The wonderfully named Rextro64 is another offender here, at least early on. You'll encounter the comically polygonal NPC in each main world where you'll have to find and give him a play coin in order to play one of his retro-inspired arcade games. Complete the game's challenge and you'll get a pagey, along with the promise of more difficult times and scores to shoot for in future attempts, of course. But here's the problem. The first Rextro game I came across, Kartos Karting, a riff on the top-down arcade racers of yesteryear like Super Off-Road, is just dreadful to play. The controls are way too loose, looser than the game that inspired it, and it just didn't feel like there was much point to it all other than Playtonic being able to say, "See, we have minigames too." Of course, Kartos Karting is just one of Rextro's games, and the others may end up being a lot of fun. Still, I couldn't help but notice that the only times Yooka-Laylee really suffered for me from a gameplay perspective was when it tried to break its own flow and be something other than a 3D platformer. Playtonic asked that we keep story spoilers to a minimum for this preview, so we're not allowed to talk about much of what happens in the cutscenes I saw. And GameXplain isn't in the business of handing out unnecessary spoilers anyway, so all I'll say is this. Central bad guy Capital B and his chief underling Dr. Quack gave me a lot of laughs in the early going and seemed to capture that same overtly cartoonish charm that made Gruntilda and Klungo such effective, entertaining foils to Banjo and Kazooie back in the day. If there's one thing Yooka-Laylee makes abundantly clear about its story from the get-go, it's that it doesn't take itself seriously, and neither should you. Yooka-Laylee wears its whimsy on its sleeve, handily combining a family-friendly world and characters with vaguely lowbrow British humor. That's humor with a U, by the way, which often breaks the fourth wall and pokes fun at the game industry at large. It's sharp stuff so far, clearly meant to appeal to older players while keeping the younger crowd engaged in blissful ignorance. If the game's opening hours are any indication, Yooka-Laylee's writing is mostly funny and on point, despite my spying a few typos in the mix. It seems strange then that a game with such a freewheeling approach to its story forces you to sit through its cutscenes, whether you want to or not. While I'm not in the business of skipping cutscenes myself, I only had 2 hours to play the game, so I figured I'd mostly skip them for now and watch them when playing my own copy of the game later on. But not only does Yooka-Laylee not allow you to skip cutscenes, you're often not even permitted to speed up the dialogue within those cutscenes either. While this is also true of Banjo-Kazooie, I would have liked to see certain elements of the past stay there, the forced approach to cutscenes and dialogue speed being one of them. Fortunately, for you faster readers out there, you can still speed up the dialogue outside of cutscenes, so it's not a total loss. Speaking of dialogue, no Yooka-Laylee preview would be complete without mentioning the game's voices, which aren't so much voices as they are random grunts and sounds mixed together to create hilarious approximations of voices. It's the exact same approach taken by Banjo-Kazooie and certain other games like Okami, and it's played to wonderful comedic effect in Yooka-Laylee. On the other hand, if you're one of those people who have always found such voices to be annoying, Yooka-Laylee isn't likely to change your mind. Much ado has been made about original Banjo-Kazooie composer Grant Kirkhope being brought on to do Yooka-Laylee's soundtrack, with contributions from fellow Rare alumnus David Wise, and that's exactly why I'm surprised to report that I'm somewhat underwhelmed by Yooka-Laylee's soundtrack so far. While I do want to stress that the music here is not bad by any means, Kirkhope seems to be going for a very different style here, forgoing Banjo-Kazooie's strong, earwormy melody lines in favor of a more ambient film score-like approach. In other words, the soundtrack here seems intentionally relegated to the background instead of being more or less its own character like it was in the Banjo games. Even main level themes have a surprisingly quiet, pervasive feel to them, and how you feel about this will depend on your personal taste in music and how married you are to the idea of Kirkhope producing another Banjo-Kazooie style soundtrack. That said, I'm happy to report that Yooka-Laylee does once again have a dynamic soundtrack in the sense that you'll often hear the same central melody repurposed in different ways as you explore different parts of a particular world. Visually, Yooka-Laylee has a very straightforwardly clean, attractive look to it without necessarily pushing the envelope. It's exactly how you'd expect a well-funded indie 3D platformer to look, and while it's not likely to win any awards for cutting-edge graphics, it's consistently pleasing to look at. The worlds Yooka and Laylee explore really pop thanks to the cartoonishly exaggerated designs of the characters populating them, and the game's bright, vivid color palette in general is a pleasure to behold. Everything runs at a mostly smooth 60 frames per second too, with occasional frame drops here and there. That said, special attention should be lavished on Yooka and Laylee themselves. They really look fantastic, with all their various little animations going a long way toward communicating their different personalities while also demonstrating their close friendship. If you're not smiling the first time Yooka suffers fall damage from a particularly long drop and Laylee gently pulls her disoriented buddy up from the ground, I just don't know if we can be friends. In closing, perhaps the best thing I can say about my time with the near final retail build of Yooka-Laylee is that 2 hours wasn't nearly enough. I found myself repeatedly checking the time during the demo, knowing my time with the game would be coming to an end all too soon. While I had a few minor issues as outlined previously, and it remains to be seen how Yooka-Laylee's more player-directed approach to Banjo-Kazooie's blueprints will ultimately work out, I left my demo unable to think of much else besides how dearly I had missed games like this and how much I'm dying to explore every last corner of this game. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this preview, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media. You can find all the links you need in the video description below. Otherwise, keep it on GameXplain for more on Yooka-Laylee and all things gaming.